It's recording now?
Yes, it's recording now.
Oh, perfect.
Can you please introduce yourself briefly?
Okay. So I graduated from University of Texas at Austin in the late 2016, and my dissertation is on Mies van der Rohe and how his lifestyle shaped his spatial formulation in the 1920s. Now I worked as a junior fellow in the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen, China, Southern China.
Happy to see you and happy to have you with us. So, so what's so special about this park in the center, in the heart of Berlin, which has the name Am Karlsbad?
Mm-hmm. So M. Karlsbad 24 is where Mies lived in Berlin before he immigrated to the U.S. So I was very interested in what happened in the apartment because I think Mies's lifestyle there motivated him to create a new kind of a space in his architecture work.
And what in particular was born here? What concepts?
That would be a long story covered in my dissertation. I tried to cut it short. So Mies lived in this also first let me introduce describe the M. Karlsbad 24. It is an apartment. It is a apartment building at the center of Berlin, which is only 10 to 15 minutes walk to the Potsdamer Platz. That's a very good location in Berlin. And this building had 4 floors. It had a basement, raised the first floor, and 2 floors upstairs. And the Mies's apartment occupied the entire top floor. So it was big. It measured about over 200 square meters. And Mies led we can say, a very unusual kind of lifestyle there. He lived there. He led a busy and manifold, very vibrant kind of life there. But the various kinds of activities taken place in the apartment, but the apartment had this kind of a traditional restrictive kind of a layout that made Mies feel it is really inconvenient. For example, like when he held a party in their apartment, and when there were a lot of guests stayed over, and there were not a lot of space for them, Mies slept in the bathroom. So he had this very flexible, spontaneous kind of a crazy kind of lifestyle. And even though the space was big, but when there were a lot of people, it felt very crowded. Sometimes people Mies made models in the balcony rather than in the room. So he used the space very flexibly, and this led him to rethink about how people were living at the time, which led him to realize that people were now living a far more informal, far more spontaneous, and a far more inclusive kind of lifestyle. And the problem for Mies is that this kind of lifestyle had not found its form in dwellings yet. And that's how he tried to solve this problem in his domestic architecture. And he came up with a new spatial concept. The kind of a concept we saw in the Weissenhof-Siedlung, the apartment building, where he created this kind of a screen which allowed the inhabitants to adjust the spatial layout of the apartment to meet their changing needs.
You talked about his numerous guests and the parties, and of course, working hard, writing hard, meeting hard. How did his family react to his adjustments in the apartment?
That's a good question. So Mies lived with his family. Ada, that was his wife, and 3 daughters, and perhaps a couple of nannies in the apartment until 1921. So it was the apartment was supposed to be a typical bourgeoisie kind of family apartment for him and his family, but unfortunately, in 1921. He and Ada was split, and Ada moved out with daughters. And since then, Mies just transformed or just turned the apartment into almost a bachelor's abode and his studio. So his professional life, his social life, and his personal life just converged in this place since 1921. Yes.
I see. And so it was the place where he actually came to the concept of the open space living place, right?
Yeah.
Can we call it this?
That is I was trying to convince you in my dissertation. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And did he manage to understand it and write about it, or he first manifested it in his building activity?
You mean when did he put his idea down in writing or in his design?
Yeah. What was first? Was it spontaneous for him too, to start to produce designs with this open space composition?
I think the transition in thoughts can really that gradually, because in the early 1920s, Mies read widely and he befriended the top philosophers in Germany at the time, and which triggered a transition in his thoughts, and he transformed his inspirational source from modern technology to modern life. And then he began to re-examine his life. And in writing, he only writes really rather loftily on a very philosophical level, but we can read between lines to know that he was interested in modern life, but unfortunately he did not really define what modern life meant to him. So from there, I think that his everyday life is contribute to the concept of modern life to him. So he began to re-examine his life in the apartment and also observe what his friends, his avant-garde artists' life in their studio and in their apartments. He gets the idea that people were now living rather spontaneous kind of life, and that kind of life needs a new spatial layout to accommodate. And I think the first sign of how he put down these thoughts into design is in the Weissenhof-Siedlung, where he designed for the working class. The apartment building was his, and he came up with many scenarios, like the apartment for a single lady, working professional lady, or apartment for a family with 2 children, these kind of scenarios. And he designed like a 10 or more layouts for the apartment building. And he came up with this device of a movable screens. That's the I think that reflects his care and his understanding of the flexible modern living, because that screen would allow people to adjust the spatial layout to their changing needs, exactly what he would love to have in his apartment.
Do you think that this idea of a movable screen in the Mies creativity is the sign of this big, huge Eastern influence in the beginning of the 20th century? So the influence of Japanese architecture and Japanese design, this exotism, or it was something natural that was coming out from his own experience?
I think that is like a result of a collective influence. I'm only showing that one interpretation that he drew from his own living experience to feel the need to have these flexible spaces. But certainly he can get the similar ideas from Frank Lloyd Wright's design. The Wasmus portfolio was really popular among avant-garde architects. But what made him find that the open space or the open space idea valuable at the moment is because that his own life needs this kind of a flexible spatial arrangement.
Mm-hmm. I have so many questions to ask to you, but let's do it in two more. Thanks for mentioning rights, because this is typically, from European point of view, we have a kind of division of what was happening in the US and what was happening in the rest of Europe. Do you think that American influence was, American architecture was regarded by the masters of German avant-garde architecture those days? Did they have a special view of it?
By American architecture, you mean you are referring to the general idea of American architecture, or specifically Frank Lloyd Wright's work?
Well, this is a good thing to precise. I mentioned, of course, engineering from one point of view, and I imagine that from engineering point of view, the US was the pioneer. But from the other point of view, I mean Frank Lloyd Wright, of course, yes.
Yes, in regard of engineering, the structure, especially the factory made by Albert Kahn, that was a very good influence on many of the European modernists, because it shows clear structure and the honest use of new material and the open space, because that is for factory. They need an open space to put the big machine. But I think that influence was flourished in the early part of the 1920s, when they kind of in European, there's a tendency to worship the technology, the new technology, the new material in European countries. But at least for me, since the middle of the 1920s, his interest shifted to other things. He began to realize that the modern technology, modern material, they're just tools. They should not be the major forming agent for architecture. You have to master the tools, but don't have you do not necessarily have let the tools to drive you. I think that's a kind of a turning point in his thoughts. And I think another influence is the Fordism, that the Henry Ford, his biography was really popular. It has like a fourth edition in Germany at the time. Everyone read that. It represented like a American, not just American architecture, American culture represented like a efficiency and also the pragmatic kind of thinking that was really popular in Germany. But Mies certainly read Henry Ford, but his reaction or his taken on that point was that we need even though we need to stand on the ground, we needed to be practical, but we still have to look up to the sky, which means that we also, that's not enough just to have like this kind of efficiency thought or practical thought. We still need this kind to create a modern spirituality in our buildings.
I see. Thank you. How was the Mies house in the US? Did you manage to visit one of them?
I visited. I was outside the lakeshore in Chicago, and also the Seagram. Seagram is really beautiful in New York, but I was not able to get inside. It is now an office building, and you have to like be invited to get in. So
he had an apartment inside of. He had an apartment inside of Seagram building.
No. I mean, I visited the Seagram. Oh, you are asking me where he lived in the U.S.
Yes. How was his? Did he continue his bachelor free space, open space idea of living in his houses during the immigration years?
Yeah, that was a very interesting question, because I really looked into how he lived in the U.S. Basically, more or less very similar to how he lived in Berlin. He had the option to live in the lakeshore, the fancy glass wall apartment building he built in Chicago, but he turned the option down. He said that he did not want to ride a same elevator with the residents, and perhaps those residents would complain about his design. He cannot bear it. So he rented a rather traditional apartment, which is not really far from IIT, and it has this like a open big space, and he put little furniture into the space. So I read that when his students come to visit him, if there are a lot of people, some of them have to sit on the ground, and just still this kind of the space has this kind of a spontaneous, inclusive, flexible air, marked with his flexible lifestyle in the apartment.
I see. So, and please tell me, how did you come to this idea of researching the home of an architect, looking to explain with it his legacy?
Because in general, when I was in the graduate school, I grew more and more interested in the issue about everyday life and the architecture making. So you see that most of us gave a lot of thoughts on ordinary, mundane things like holidays, what's for lunch and with whom, and it must be the same with those great historic figures. But it is really difficult to prove that it has any real connection, because like everyday life, it has this repetitive pattern that strengthens itself on a daily basis. And in a way, it's like transformed our worldview on a subconscious level in voluntarily. So I would love to dig how everyday life just has anything to do with art making. So that's why I look into the Mies van Rohe's domestic architecture and try to see how that was related to his own lifestyle or where he lived, to see how those two were connected.
And why did you choose Mies for this kind of research?
Because first of all, I was interested in his transition in the 1920s, and the second reason is that his space was so elegant, so orderly, nothing like this hectic, busy lifestyle in his apartment. That the contradiction really interests me, and that's why I would love to understand the connection, or perhaps there's no connection between the two. So that's why I began the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so 100 years after the Carlsbad apartment, which no longer exists, and the house no longer exists, so many people in the world, all over the world, are living in this open space apartment. They are buying this open space apartment.
Right.
And the number of bachelor rise, actually, in Japan, in Russia, in the US. Do you think there is a reason behind it?
You mean why open spaces are popular?
Why open spaces probably dictate our new lifestyle. So the Mies is dictating us this bachelor's lifestyle, communicating to us within the architecture, which became a commonplace now. It's not more an avant-garde solution.
Yeah, I know. It's become like it really become everyday life, especially for those who have this kind of liberated kind of spirit. I think it worked like a double ways, because Mies, he himself is an avant-garde artist, and he lived in an environment where everyone else lived similarly. Like his friends lived just like him. When they had a party, I read in some journal there were beers and they were dancing and the mattress on the floor, which implied that they were partying in some artist's studio and slash bedroom, and also that was also his apartment. So I would say that Mies van Rohe's lifestyle was really typical among the avant-garde in Berlin, or perhaps even in Paris. So it's not like the Mies's space just affirmed this kind of lifestyle, and then just passed this on to us by his architecture success. Also brought us his lifestyle, or the lifestyle of his friends, companions, the avant-garde artists in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of lifestyle is kind of really attractive to me. I mean, to most of the people today who would love to have this after work, they would love to come back to this kind of relaxing, and you can be more spontaneous, and rather than to have this like a rigid and formal kind of lifestyle that the old conventional bourgeoisie domestic life would have.
Would you choose this kind of design for your house, or you already have a house like this?
I think for the public area, I would love to have this kind of an open space. We would have the dining room and the living room and the kitchen, perhaps in an open space. But for a bedroom, I would love to have more privacy, and I would use more traditional design. Yeah, that's only for me, my personal choice. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time and for your interview and for your beautiful dissertation. And good luck with your studies and your career. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. it was fun. It has been really a pleasure chatting with you.